Hello, today is Wednesday, June 4th, and welcome to episode 460 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI fellow Jessica Jones, and I'm joined today by my sunburned Italian friend, advisory board member Lester Munson, and NSI senior fellow Jeffrey Wells. All right, folks, Les, you might have missed this because you're doing the tour of the Coliseum, but earlier this week, we saw potentially an escalation in the war in Ukraine with Operation Spiderweb, a large-scale Ukrainian drone attack targeting Russian strategic bomber fleets across multiple airfields. Ukraine's operation, which took over 18 months to plan, delivered a major strategic coup in the war that otherwise, as we know, as we update every week, seems largely at a stalemate. The operation included 117 drones. It struck at the heart of Moscow's long-range strike capability. So it made some headlines. Adding kind of to the shock, U.S. officials appeared to have no advance warning of the attack, raising questions about how much Ukraine and the U.S. are talking. The attack also came right before Russian and Ukrainian delegations began discussions in Turkey, on talking about a potential ceasefire or settlement. And of course, even our own U.S. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal were also visiting with President Zelensky for the attack. So a lot happening. So Jeffrey, I want to turn first to you to talk a little bit about Operation Spiderweb. Like, how big of a deal was it? Like, how much planning did this take? Is this a new phase in the conflict? Does it mark the start of a new phase?
Thank you. And as you know, this one's personal, having spent most of this year in Ukraine. This has been going on, some reported, 15, 16 months, I believe. It's been a little bit longer than that. And as Ukraine is constantly looking for innovative ways to move forward in defending itself against Russian aggression, and has constantly looked for legitimate targets, not just on the battlefields in Ukraine, but inside of Russia, and has often been told by its Western partners, Russia's off limits. So I'm also a bit concerned about the way this has been framed in Western media. And I know we were just joking about musicals. I can't think of a musical, but I'm going to quote Taylor Swift and say, that bad blood kind of comes to mind, and that Balea, air bases at Balea and Alina, those have presented, certainly over the last 2 years, significant hurt and anger in the Ukrainian mindset. Even though day to day they're moving along, I think that they decided, after last week's events of significant escalation by the Russians, to do something really bold. And they've decided that these drones have worked significantly well domestically. How can we extend them further into the Russian environment to do that? And so I'd say at the moment that this is precisely the mood in Ukraine these days. Is there's definitely bad blood, and as I said, June 1st, the Russians, with their bombers from these bases, took off and attacked homes, hospitals, and schools. Not military targets in Ukraine, but those. And for Ukrainians, I can imagine that they relate to this song. Actually, I know they do, because I speak to them every day. They feel betrayed by the West, betrayed by Russia. They're under constant threat, and they're waiting for that next blow. And I'd say that instead of passive endurance, as they have been demonstrating consistently for at least 13 months, their defenders decided to flip the script. And now a quote from history, or a little something from history, is this is a little bit reminiscent of the Doolittle raid of 1942, when the American B-52s really quickly flew over Tokyo to remind Japan that the U.S. can strike in their heartland. And that had a pretty significant effect as well. And so Operation Spiderweb, was targeting those things that rain destruction on its cities. And it doesn't matter that they are nuclear capable bombers, from my perspective. And I think that's a whole different conversation. And I think that hitting these aircraft on the tarmac, especially, they seized the initiative. They demonstrated that they are using international law of warfare to defend their civilians against ongoing attacks. And that is permitted, and it's imperative. And when a bomber lands, refuels, and prepares for another mission, it becomes a legitimate target. And making that evaporate before the next wave of missiles certainly isn't aggression; it's a proportional defense. So, I think the optics of Ukraine attacks Russia's nuclear bomber fleet stokes fears in the blogosphere, the pundosphere, whoever. And again, I think that those were conventional missiles on those airplanes. It's irrelevant, and I think that sensationalism. And I think that suddenly now no runway in Russia feels safe. That should compel Moscow to spread its assets thinner, invest more in its base defenses, and inject doubt into every sortie that they fly. And I think it was kind of, certainly a tactical win for Ukraine. Strategically, I think that we're kind of, we'll see how this plays out. I don't know that Vladimir Putin is interested in traveling outside the country to have real conversations about what this means, but. I'll just close and quoting the poet of Ukraine from the 19th century, Taras Shevchenko, which says, struggle and you shall overcome. I believe that's what Ukraine is living up to today.
Okay, Les, you have a lot to follow. We had Doolittle, we had a Ukrainian poet, we had Taylor Swift. I don't know if you can you are jet lagged. You are tired. I don't know if you can make up for it, but let me turn to you now. Okay, so some questions. We had some discussions, and we had some discussions in Turkey. Erdogan would love to see Putin, Zelensky, and Trump, all three of them, the good trio, come together to talk because the discussions lasted, I think, about 1 hour this week, so they didn't really come to much. What do you think Operation Spiderweb means for this a potential ceasefire? How does it seems the U.S. The U.S. was not clued in. What does that mean? What does President Trump do? He's been actually pretty silent on the drone attack, so we haven't seen his, Twitter go off. What can we expect from the White House?
Well, I think the current events to try to attempt to match what Jeffrey just did. Let me just point out that I think the current situation reaffirms my view that Red Dawn of 1984 was the greatest movie of all time. Wolverines.
Let's just stop to Mike and leaves right now.
Point being, when communists invade, do not discount the ability of the local population to wage an amazing asymmetric war for liberation. So God bless the Ukrainians. I do think there's two real points here. One, at least two real points here, and one of them, Jeffrey, was kind of. I think I'm going to make it in a slightly different way. This drone activity is transformative. And yes, it is wonderful what the Ukrainians did to the Russians. I don't care what the pundit sphere says. That was great. Good job, Ukraine. There's a lesson here for us, which is warfare is totally changing. The technology is changing. It is changing on a daily basis. There is just a super pragmatic need for the U.S. to remain engaged with the Ukrainians in whatever advisory role so that we can track these changes and see what's going on in real time. It is in our own national interest to do so because we also have nuclear bombers that are vulnerable to asymmetric attack. And I'm not saying like a drone attack from the Ukrainians would win against us. I don't think it would, but we're the biggest power on the block. We're the ones who have the most to lose from asymmetric attacks like this. And we need to take as many lessons as we possibly can from the current situation in Ukraine. So I think it's just on a real basic level for the U.S. we should remain involved in the Ukrainians. I think in a larger political question, as you were hinting at, Jones, this is kind of bluff calling time for Trump, and it's true in a lot of ways, right? His domestic policy agenda just got a big schwack from Elon Musk. Unclear. I mean, I think it's going to end up moving.
Pundit sphere, if you will, yeah.
Pundit sphere, yeah. And but there's like a real political crisis of sorts inside the kind of the Trump core base, and so he's got to manage that. He's running into obstacles with his Iran negotiation strategy. Gaza, a little murky to me. I'm not exactly sure where that's going. And now Putin is definitely giving him the stiff arm, and so he's got to do something transformative here, something that will change the game, reset the cards. He does have cards to play. There's a big sanctions bill in the Senate, very bipartisan, that could go in about 2 seconds. he could do something dramatic here and reset the game and give himself more leverage than he has right now. Because I think the way things are playing out, the trend is not great for President Trump's act. Like it's people are calling the bluff. It's not a bluff. He has cards to play, but he needs to actually play them. So I think there's a big decision point coming up here for President Trump on this whole question.
Ooh, that seems like some exciting fault lines fodder. Maybe Iran's Friday, though. We'll see. That's a wrap. We made it. You guys, we made it through Hump Day. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Thanks to Kelly Crawley, Tyler Lane, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI team for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, June 6th, where we see if any of President Trump's cards have been played. We are the Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast, just as quickly as I talk. On the National Security and Foreign Policy Debates, Shaking Up America, we're on YouTube. Check out this color-coded bookcase that Jeffrey's got behind him if you do check us out. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.